It's my lucky day. It's my lucky day. It's my lucky day. My lucky day. Don't need a pot of gold.
Good morning, everybody. It's 2 days in a row that I started the show, right? I think so. Looks good. Hey, today's August 20th, and I want to welcome you to episode 24 of Coffee and Cloud Native. My name is Adrian Goins. Every night, I and my army of bots scour the internet for news and content related to Kubernetes and Cloud Native, and every day, you will find me here to share the bits that I find interesting. This is a curated list of content. I go through around 200 submissions every night, and I select only a handful for the next day's show. If you are watching now or in the future, please click the thumbs up button on the video so the YouTube algorithm shares it with other people. I love putting this show together for you because it helps me end each day with knowledge that I didn't have when the day began. And I'm grateful that you're here with me so bright and early on this really cold morning. It is so cold. I actually have a hot water bottle in my lap because it's freezing. It's like 6 degrees in my room right now. Anyway, I'm happy that you joined me here today so that I can talk about how cold it is and so we can learn and grow together. So we only have a half an hour. Let's get started. Yay! I'm so scared that I won't start the stream now, that I'll miss a button or something like that, that I'm always checking the chat and people say, hey, we're good. You can hear me. All right. Actually, before I start with the browser, we had some late-breaking news last night that I didn't get into. I don't even know if there's an announcement, but K3S was accepted as a CNCF sandbox project. So congratulations, Rancher, and all of the developers and everybody who's really taken K3S and brought it into their universe and started to build applications and solutions on top of it. I think when Rancher launched K3S, they're like, yeah, this is cool, we made it, and it's useful. I don't think anybody expected it to become quite as popular as it is. So it's now a CNCF sandbox project. I'm looking forward to seeing it continue its way through the CNCF landscape. And the other thing that I don't have in the browser is yesterday we had Megalix on, and I talked about how I set it up in my cluster, but it takes about 24 hours for them to start generating recommendations. Well, they started generating recommendations last night after I went to bed, and I got up this morning and I looked. It's really cool. It's super cool. It told me so much about my cluster that I didn't know because I was doing what I described yesterday, where it's like, oh, I don't really know how much WordPress needs. I run a WordPress site for a friend of mine, so I'll give it, a reservation of 128 megabytes and a limit of a gigabyte of RAM, because I don't know, is it gonna take charge and steal stuff? Turns out it doesn't. It needs about 140 megabytes of RAM, so I upped the request and reduce the limits, and now I feel good that I'm making decisions based on actual data. I didn't make a lot of changes this morning. I just clicked around and did, drilled down into their graphs and looked at their recommendations. It's super cool. So if you didn't deploy that yesterday, definitely go check that out. And if you're still at KubeCon today, well, stop by their booth and get a demo and they can show you what it's all about. Okay, now onto the stuff that happens in the browser. Falco has a release coming next week. Falco 0.25 is going to drop on August 25. I don't know if that was an accident or not. It includes a number of improvements to rules, such as it will understand Kubernetes pod security policies. Alerts are tagged with the MITRE attack classification matrix. New rules have been added for known CVEs, including detection of outbound connections to crypto mining pool hosts and ports. So if you're concerned, earlier this week I talked about there's a new Team TNT worm going around that's stealing AWS credentials and then installing crypto mining software. If you're running Falco after next week, it'll tell you if... So for today, you're not so well protected, but next week you'll be doing fine. Anyway, it will help detect those kinds of things. They've also made progress in the reduction of false positives, and this doesn't sound like something that you should necessarily put into your release notes because it makes people wonder, oh, is it doing lots of false positives now? But in any type of monitoring system, there's always going to be false positives, and building an algorithmic framework to reduce those, it's on the to-do list of every single developer who works on anything that does any kind of monitoring. So I'm glad to see that they've moved that out to the front and said, yeah, we've really put a lot of effort into this. It has a new gRPC output mechanism that enables various forms of alert consumption by subscription, either in real time or batched. And this looks really cool. You don't have to actually sit there and get a steady stream if you don't want. You can connect, pull a whole batch of them up to the current time, and then disconnect, and it'll queue everything up and wait for you to come back and get more of them. There is a new exporter that consumes Falco alerts and sends them to Prometheus. Sounds pretty cool. And they also make a specific shout out to Thomas Labarusius for work that he did on the Falco Sidekick, which integrates Falco with, well, pretty much everything. Let me scroll down to this here. Yeah, there. So he's been working on this Falco Sidekick project, and it integrates Falco with Slack, Rocket Chat, Mattermost, Teams, Discord, Datadog, Alert Manager, Elasticsearch, Loki, Nats, Who is this guy? Like, how long did it take to do this? Lambda, SQS, Azure Event Hubs, SMTP, Ops Genie, StatsD, Dog StatsD, and probably by next week, he'll have 100 more things that he'll have Falco talking to. So shout out to him for making it possible to actually receive alerts wherever you want them. I'm looking forward to seeing it integrate with the U.S. Postal Service and FedEx and UPS and telepathy and good morning. Hey, Wojtek's in Krakow. Nice. I used to live in Krakow. I miss it a lot. My company had an office. It was right outside of the old town near Wawel, which is the castle. He knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, it was so beautiful living there. If you've never been to Krakow, or if you speak not European, Krakow, put that on your bucket list. It's one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. It's amazing. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Chris, Nuno, Trix, hey. Yeah, Trix, you're definitely going to lose money if you take bets with your bookie now. I know how to start the show. I figured it out. Moz, good morning. Peter, Devin, and Ashley, hello. So we do have a chat going on over here that I don't have time to participate in, but I do check it. So if there's any questions that you have, or you want to, just talk amongst yourselves or make fun of me, or that's the place to do it, right over there. Next, I figured out something else that's really cool today. I figured out how to switch tabs without having to scroll back up so that the tab bar reappears. Hey, how neat is that? With the iPad Pro, and probably with anything else that has a keyboard that's Apple, if you hold down the command button, it'll actually pop up a list of keyboard shortcuts that you can use with whatever application you have up in front of you. Neat stuff. There you go. Not cloud native. Nothing to do with Kubernetes. I'm going to move my coffee away before I knock it over again. Except we want to be here. All right. Oh, the last thing actually about Falco. They also changed some stuff with the driver. So now you can run it as a kernel module, an eBPF probe, or they have a new driver called pdig. This does not need access to the host. I mean, it obviously needs to be running on a host, but it doesn't need host level access. The only permission that it needs is, or capability that it needs is capsys ptrace, and with that, it can do kernel tracing from userspace. So that makes it a lot more friendly. Probably you can get Falco deployed in a lot more places where an operations or security team might have been like, we're not giving you access to our cluster. That's how they talk. You know that. All the ops people, they're like, they got some southern accent or something. They're like, Yes, so that comes out next week. Now, pod eviction. Pod eviction is about more than just booting things off when they violate limits on CPU or memory. It also comes into effect with scheduling, when Kubernetes is deciding where to place a pod. So in this article, Prashant, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your last name, dude. Prashant Gildial, there you go, hopefully, Prashant walks us through the logic of eviction at scheduling time. And he starts first by explaining how Kubernetes sees QoS with guaranteed, burstable, and best effort management of resources. Guaranteed is where you have the request and the limit set to the same value. Burstable is where you have requests set to one value and limits set to higher. That tends to be where I run my stuff when I have requested limits installed at all. Shh. And then best effort is actually where most of my stuff runs, where I don't have anything set at all. I'm trying to get better, I promise. So he defines these things as like just kind of a lexicon, and then he goes on to talk about how priority classes work, and that pods with a higher priority are placed ahead in a queue, and if a preemption policy is set to preempt lower priority, then pods of a lower priority are actually evicted from a node to make space for the higher priority ones that are coming in. The article continues with discussion about how to accurately set expectations for pod preemption. Talks about best practices for working with pod preemption and strategies for updating requests and limits on all of your workloads, including things like when you're setting it up for the first time, you must start with pods with the highest priority or keep the preemption policy as never, because the default priority of the pod is 0. If you set priority, then it's gonna like boot stuff off that you didn't mean to have booted off, and wackiness will ensue. So it's really nice that he's not just like, hey, here's a bunch of information, but it's like, here's a bunch of information, here's how not to totally screw it up when you go and implement this information. I'll have this linked in the video description. You can check it out. Great article on the essential guide to pod eviction on Kubernetes. So Mose says, yeah, Mose, you can't post links in the chat. Sorry about that. But Mose says, AWS has announced the AWS controller for Kubernetes, which allows you to provision AWS resources as Kubernetes resources. Really? Okay, I don't have anything to make notes on. I'll check that out for tomorrow's show. I didn't see that yesterday. That's cool. Actually, yesterday, I tell you in the beginning of the show that I have about 200 things that I go through every night. Last night, I kid you not, it was 460. I didn't make it through the whole list. I was like, I'm not going through that. That'll take me all night. So I just went through until I had enough stuff for the show. I will look at that. That's neat. Usernetes. I hadn't heard of this. Usernetes runs Kubernetes within userspace with no root privileges. Now this is another one of those why kind of things, but it shows how people are really pushing the edge of the envelope, or pushing the envelope. I don't know. Do you push the edge of the envelope? I don't really know. I'm mixing my metaphors. They're getting right to the edge of what's possible and being like, well, why the heck should we stop here? Is the Kubernetes world flat? I don't know. Let's dive off and see. Basically, if you want to run Kubernetes and you don't have root access to a system, you can apparently run it entirely in user space if you have access to Fuse, IP tables, and a couple other regular system binaries. You can just run a Kubernetes cluster literally from like files in your home directory, or you can run it inside Docker. There are some things that it can't do without root configuration, but for the most part, it just works. Just like we went from having containers running as root to containers running not as root, but in Kubernetes running as root, and now we're looking at Kubernetes not running as root. And you have this whole rootless container image stuff that's like, how long before we actually don't need servers? Like, and I'm not talking about serverless. Serverless is a misnomer. Like, I'm kind of kidding. But it seems like that's the direction that we're going. Like, pretty soon, we don't need servers. We don't need the data center. We don't need the internet. Let's just think about the Kubernetes. I turned the gate off on the mic today. I don't know if you've noticed in previous shows, sometimes there's a weird click, especially if you're listening on headphones. Today, you probably hear a little bit of background noise because I live between two rivers, so there's like a steady white noise. I had a gate on the audio to cut that off, and then I realized yesterday that if I talk very softly, you can't hear me. So I took it off. Let me know if it sounds okay, or if it sounds like there's, you know, like a hairdryer playing in the room, which there's not. Usernetes is included in K3S as an experimental feature. So if you want to run K3S in an environment with no root access to the host, give it a shot. What else would you use this for? Like, how can you imagine this being used? Like, I hear, hey, you can deploy it on a system where you don't have root access. And I'm like, well, why would you have a system where you don't have root access? Like, I launch my own instances and then I deploy stuff onto them. If I was an operator of a system and my users didn't have root access, how would I feel about them running Kubernetes when they don't really, like, the reason they don't have root access is so they can't go running crazy stuff that sucks up all the resources of the system. If they're running Kubernetes, is that okay? Is it really any different from, like, you know, running a static website in public HTML? I think so. Tell me what you think. Kubernetes and cPanel, how's that, right? You're gonna have VPS providers being like, yes, we'll give you a Kubernetes cluster over here. I don't know, there has to be a place for this, and maybe the place is very small, but the people who live in that place are probably happy that this exists. By the rootless master Akihiro. Oh, is he the guy that did rootless Docker? I didn't know. Let's jump back up to the top there. Yeah, Akihiro. Okay. So this is his kick, rootless stuff. That's cool. Thanks, Nuno. Chris says it sounds great, but then his desk lives right next to it too. Oh, okay. My audio sounds great, not rootless Kubernetes. Okay, great. Well, thank you. Oh man, 1U servers. I'll tell you a really quick story. So sometimes I talk about how I have the fanless systems in the house because I have to pass the wife test, and I told you that, like, well, whatever, the tower systems. I took 2 compact DL360s to Poland from the United States when I was setting up my office over there. I literally, like, packed them as luggage and tried to explain to the security guys that, you know, no, they're just they're VPN servers, so I can communicate back to whatever. I always travel with 2 1U rack mount servers. Who doesn't? And then I installed them in the office that I was sharing with a company called Union Square Internet. So if you guys are watching, Tom and Ted, hey, what's up? And all the guys in Krakow at U2I. I installed them in their phone closet where they had a couple of tower machines. You want to talk about some horrible sounds? Those things are so loud. I don't care, you had that door shut, but there's like 40 people in an office, basically a closet door, and 2 screaming 1U servers. I am so surprised that they didn't just kick me right out. Anyway, I learned from that lesson. I learned why tower computers exist. I learned that I didn't know what I was doing. But then, of course, I figure that out almost every day. Next up, we have an update for Skipper. Skipper was on episode 14. It's an HTTP router created by Zalando. This is their update page. Whatever. Created by Zalando that's capable of upwards of 300,000 routing definitions with detailed lookup conditions and request mutations. That's a lot. They just released 0.11.141, and there's a feature that made it in here that's important, so I thought I'd bring it on the show. It contains an AdmissionWebhook server to validate route groups. So route groups they're a feature that works similar to an ingress if you're using Skipper. Route groups, there you go. Route groups have built-in support for things like canary deployments, A/B testing, dynamic failover. So when you launch something new, you put a little bit of traffic on it and you increase that over time until everything fails over, and a bunch of other dynamic adjustments. And apparently it was possible to send updates to route groups without any type of validation, and that was causing people's clusters to fail. That's a bad thing. So somebody decided they were sick of that, and they created a validation server that will check that what you're posting is accurate and isn't going to crash your application before it applies it to the cluster. Good job, guys. Have you heard about Terrascan? Terrascan, Justin says his home lab is a 4x herd of old laptops. Laptops make great home systems. Just check their batteries. My MacBook Pro is looks like roadkill. Terrascan. They just released 1.0. It's a brand new tool from Accurix. hello, Accurix, that will scan your infrastructure as code configuration and validate it against more than 500 policies, including CIS benchmarks. It works with OPA, so you can create your own custom policies you can create your own custom policies at the highest pricing tier. I'll show you that in a second. Not super excited about their pricing, but it has a place. So it'll scan code in repositories, or it will scan, look at that, graphics. It will scan code in repos or as a part of your CI/CD pipeline. And when you run it against a repo, it'll scan content as soon as it's committed and then generate a report of any violations. That seems to me like it's still a little bit too late. Like, I would like to see it scan as maybe part of a pre-commit hook in a local repo or something, like scanning in the repo once it's already there and then generating a report. If you already have something that's like looking for changes in your repo and pulling it and building and whatnot, then scanning the repo, it's probably the wrong place to do it. It's better than not doing it at all. Anyway, I haven't actually pulled this down and tried it because I have no Terraform content on which to run it. They support a ton of stuff. They have a free tier that scans up to 1,000 resources a month. And then they have paid plans above that that go basically from free to, oh my God, $950 per month to start. But let's look at what it can do. It can do a lot. It's got a detailed chart here of all of the capabilities that are available at each tier, and then what scanning and policy support is available for the various tiers. So at the basic tier, you get support for Terraform, and no support for lots of other things, but at higher tiers, you can get support for CloudFormation, Azure Resource Manager, Google Cloud Deployment Manager, and then at the highest tier, you also get scanning of Kubernetes YAML. That seems to me like that should be in a lower tier. I'm not going to pay an unspecified amount of money to scan my Kubernetes YAML. But anyway, Docker files, Helm charts, Istio, interesting. OpenFast YAML at the enterprise tier. This is brand new. I'm going to bet that they're going to change their pricing. I think they just threw it out there and they're like, hey, let's see what people will pay for it. Because what did we learn yesterday? How much does something cost? It costs whatever you will pay. The price is what the market will bear. This is not an economics class. Clouds you can secure, AWS, Azure, and GCP. Policy as code, Accurix best practices and CIS benchmark included in the free tier. AWS best practices and a bunch of other stuff, SOC 2, GDPR, PCI DSS, HIPAA, and custom policies, and a bunch of other really cool looking stuff. If you use Terraform, take this for a spin, give them some feedback. Let me know if it's worth $950 a month. We'll see. Footloose. Oh, Adrian's going to go on a rant. Adrian doesn't have time for a rant. I'm going to go on a rant anyway. Footloose. Just over a week ago, I was excited because I discovered Sysbox by Nestybox. You can use it to run Docker containers that look like virtual servers, and they can run like systemd or Docker, or you can run Kubernetes in it. They have a whole init system. And then yesterday, I discovered, 2 days ago. I wrote this last night, so whatever. 2 days ago, I discovered that Weave actually did this 2 years ago. It's called Footloose. So when I was looking at Footloose, for the Ignite conversation. We were talking about Kubernetes on Firecracker nodes. And I already know that everything's a remix. Like, everything's a remix. In fact, that's a really good documentary. Everything's a remix. You'll learn that, like, Led Zeppelin didn't create their stuff. Everything's a remix. But a lot of things are just plain copied. Footloose is slightly different from Sysbox. It runs systemd on every container, whereas Sysbox can run other things besides systemd as PID1. But beyond that, they basically describe it as a vagrant for containers. I love Vagrant. It will also run with an Ignite backend, provisioning Firecracker micro VMs instead of using Docker directly. And it looks great. And now I'm like, well, I don't know how I feel about Nestybox. Like, did they know that Weave had already done this? And then I wondered, well, who else has done it? Was Weave even the first? So I went and I searched for Nestybox Footloose and Sysbox Footloose, and there's nothing. So that it's like, well, am I the only one who noticed this? Or am I just wrong? Or does it just not matter? And it probably just doesn't matter. I don't know. Anyway, like, I don't really know where to go from there. So instead, I will go to dataiku. We're going to run out of time. How many more of these do I have? Dataiku, Harbor. All right, we're going to punt dataiku. We're going to talk about Harbor really quick, and then we're going to wrap it up. Harbor. You know Harbor. It's the it's Docker registry with image scanning because it embeds Claire, which is another open source project. Harbor by itself, when it first came out, was pretty bare bones. But they've been adding more stuff to it. It's got RBAC, it's got policies, it's got a lot more stuff in it to make it fit into a lot more places. But then I saw this press release where they say that they're going to support machine learning artifacts. And I was like, what? I don't know enough about machine learning to talk about it intelligently, but I'm going to keep trying until I do. When you think of Harbor, you probably don't think, oh, machine learning. But they've partnered with ByteDance. ByteDance is one of the original founders of Kubeflow, and they want to deliver a solution for managing and distributing machine learning and deep learning models. And I read that and I was like, I don't even know what that means. What does that mean? Well, apparently, machine learning requires an inference server that they describe as kind of like an application server like Tomcat. So this model inference server bridges between the save model and the calling system. ByteDance did a bunch of work to try and package the model server with the models, and it just didn't work. So they decided, well, let's model the models after containers and use an OCI-compliant registry to store them. Enter Harbor, stage left. Now you can get all of the same benefits that you get from containers. Immutability, versioning, a standard interface, and from Harbor they get all of the other stuff. RBAC, lifecycle management, identity integration, security policies around model deployment. This is so smart. And it's a really smart move for Harbor to come out with this. Though I wonder how long it's going to be before it's in Artifactory and everything else. It's an OCI compliant image specification, so it seems like it'll either just work with other registries or it'll be a relatively easy port. I mean, no one's going to stop using Artifactory and switch to Harbor just so they can get machine learning model storage. Or will they? If Harbor can lock this into their product, it's smart. Harbor's free. It's smart. I don't know what they benefit from. I don't know how they benefit from taking market share away from somebody like Artifactory as an open source product. Still, I think it's really smart. This is how competition is supposed to work. The best strategy is to innovate and create a solution that moves you into a place where no one else is playing. It's called a blue sky strategy. You don't bash swords with your competitors down in the mud. Sun Tzu said, attack where your enemy is unprepared. Appear where they are not. Appear where you are not expected. And the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without even fighting. Like, don't fight, just go innovate. In fact, there was an Onion article a bunch of years ago about how Gillette had the Quattro razor and then Schick came out with one that had 5 blades, and the Onion was making fun of the CEO, claiming that he said, why innovate when we can copy? And that really stuck with me. And I say it jokingly a lot of times, why innovate when we can copy? But that's what a lot of people do. They see that somebody else is doing something that's successful, so they just go and do the same thing. And it's really easy with open source software to just take somebody's stuff and just release it as your own. That's a race to the bottom. Personally, I want to work with a company who innovates. I want to use products from companies who innovate. And if you look at where I work, well, you can see that's how I feel. All right. Couple more things. Adrian, oh, the philosophical ranting. It's a ranting kind of day. There was a massive update to Arkade. Arkade now includes support for KubeBuilder, Customize, KubeImage Prefetch, and DOCTL. Update your apps. Thank you, Alex, for getting that out. Bunch of great stuff. Arkade's really coming along. And now we're on to the tool of the day. Tool of the day. Am I late? Oh, I got 15 seconds. Whoops, I just hit the wrong button. I totally hit the wrong button. Hey, but nothing happened. Look at that. idempotent buttons on my Stream Deck. I hope. Am I still here with audio? I am. Yay! I hit the start show button again by accident. All right. Tool of the day. Decodehelm. It's a kubectl plugin. In episode 17, we had Andrew Prusky on. He wrote a blog article that covered how Helm can recover deleted apps when Kubernetes cannot, and he traced it to encoded secrets. And if you see here, make this a little bit bigger for you. Basically, there's this big, long JSON path, kubectl, pipe base 64, pipe g unzip dash c jq blah. And he's like, you know what? I don't want to type that. I don't want to type that. So at the time, I was really impressed that he was curious enough to go figure this out, and then that he wrote an article for the rest of us. But now he's like, nobody else should have to type that either, so why don't I just make a bash script that does this? But then that's not enough. Instead, why don't I turn this into a kubectl plugin? So now I can just type kubectl decodehelm, this is a little bit small down here, and then pass the release in and have this thing actually decode it all and print it out to the screen. So that's what he did. Thanks, man. This is a great follow-up to the earlier segment from him. And since we are out of time with that, we will end the show. I gotta not hit that start show button again. So yes, hi. It's that time of the show where I must end it. I will post all of the links in the video description and the Git repo as soon as the show ends. Actually, not as soon as the show ends. It's about a half an hour after the show ends. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll get a notification when that happens. If you have something that you'd like me to consider for the show, hit me up and let me know. My contact details are in the video description, or you can tweet with the CNCN hashtag and I will pick it up. If I mentioned a tool that you use, please tell me in the comments. And of course, if you liked what you saw today, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to click the little bell to get notifications when the next show starts. I'm here every weekday, as long as there's something to talk about. And if there's not something to talk about, I'll just make stuff up. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for starting my day with me. I'll see you in the next show. Bye.